Thank you so much.
For those of you who may never have been inside this building, our little corner has taken its camera inside the Press Republican offices in Plattsburgh, New York. Most of you people are familiar with the Press Republican and its daily newspaper, printed 7 days a week these days, right on the pages. We're going to take you on the inside and show you around in various offices, meet some of the people so that you can get faces behind the words. Starting with a guy who's been on hometown cable almost as much as I have, because he's like the ubiquitous Chicken Little. He's everywhere. Mike Peterson, how are you today?
Just fine, just fine. It's unusual to see you without a lot of little short people flocking around us. We're at a grown-up place now.
You know, we're referring to our little celebration every year down in Ellenburg at the school, where various people come around and talk to kids and make presentations. And I've done it a couple of times. Calvin, I don't know how many times he's done it. Maybe, 10 years? 4 or 5 years?
Great career fair.
Isn't it great?
It's one of the great career fairs. And anyone planning a career fair should call Northern Adirondack and ask them how to do it. They're the best.
It's so much fun walking around, seeing some of the same people and some different people every year down there, and to talking to kids and get a whole different perspective.
You sure do. You sure do.
I love it. Michael, let's talk about Michael Peterson. I know people don't know a lot about your background. First of all, what's your title here?
I'm Readership Services Manager, which means that I basically do a lot of things, including our educational programs, but people call in with unusual requests. They need a clipping, they need some information, and no one quite knows what it is, so they turn them over to me, and I dig as well as I can. And I also do some work in the marketing department, making up special features and things like that for marketing.
And for the readers, you lord it over me every Sunday in the Spectrum section.
I'm on top of you. We make a nice combination.
How long have you been here?
Since '87. I grew up in St. Lawrence County, but then I was exiled for about 20 years. A little college and a little time in Colorado, and came back to the North Country in '87.
You are interested in so many things, including music, as many of our viewers may know. I hope they know, because you write about it once in a while, and you also perform it. But what were your childhood aims and dreams?
Well, there was a point at which I was going to be a forest ranger. We lived about 8 miles from Wanakena, where the state ranger school is, and so I thought I could be a forest ranger and hang out in the woods. And of course, at that age, you still figure you'll live with mom and dad all your life, because you can't imagine striking out on your own.
Somebody got to press the Smokey the Bear uniform, right?
Well, that's it. And then, I took one of those career tours. We took a tour, I think, with... it may have been a science class, but we took a tour of the ranger school, and I found out that cartography is not a matter of opinion.
No.
And boy, I looked at some of the coursework at the ranger school, and I said, no, I think I'll go be a writer. So I gave up forest ranger work. That's tough work, very precise, very technical, and I've got a lot of respect for those guys. So I kind of put that one aside and started working on being a writer.
You've worked at it for a long time. We can only work at it, right?
Well, I hope I never finish.
No.
I don't think writers retire. I think they just find people less and less interested in them, so you kind of hope that never happens. It's not a job you retire from.
But before this place, you tried independent writing. You've tried a lot of things.
I've tried a lot of things. I've flipped burgers, and I've sold vacuum cleaners, and I started writing professionally I think the first time I got paid was probably 1973, 1974, somewhere in there. And, a lot of those, when you're starting out, you do a lot of those. You write a book review, and you get to keep the book. Had a writer one time,
oh, yes.
Talked to a professional writer one time, and we were talking about what we did, and I said, well, I write for a campus. This is when I was still in school. I said, I write for a campus magazine. He said, oh, does that pay? And I said, no, but you get to see your name in print. And he said, when I want to see my name in print, I pick up the phone book.
Oh, there's an idea. That'll save me a lot of time.
That's right.
So anyway, you ended up at the Press Republican. Was that pure serendipity, or did you want to get in here at the
I wanted to
time?
get home. I wanted to come home. I wanted to come back to northern New York. And one of the things I tell kids when we're talking about careers is there are some careers give you a lot of portability and some don't. Every town needs teachers. Every town needs bookkeepers. There are certain jobs that you can take anywhere. If you're going to be a writer, if you're going to be a reporter, you have to be at a place that has a newspaper. And in terms of a livable wage for a grown-up with, at the time, a couple of kids, that meant Glens Falls, Watertown, or Plattsburgh. And I actually interviewed all three places. And boy, I saw the lake out here and said, well, that's quite a lake. And
We've all done that.
we got along, and so that was actually the fall of '86, and I finally came on board in spring of '87 as they were preparing to launch the Sunday. They had a bunch of hiring going on, so it was a nice time to be
Come
asked.
on, it hasn't been that long.
It has indeed.
Whoa, isn't that
Almost
amazing?
12 years. 12 years. I think the Sunday started in October of '87.
And it didn't slide into existence painlessly either.
It took a lot of preparation.
Oh, my.
Well, that was one of the great waits was I'm sitting out in Colorado and waiting for the Sunday to launch, and it took them a couple of months to get it underway because there are a lot of wrinkles that come out. You're talking about not only a difference in the number of days you're running, but you're talking about distribution issues. You're talking about a paper that's twice as big, so you've got assembly issues. And basically, it's not as easy as simply saying, let's do it one more time.
Oh, no.
There was a lot of staffing up, there were some equipment changes, and there were a lot of very serious decisions that had to be thought out. And as you and I are both of an age to have seen several times, sometimes businesses launch into things they're not prepared to follow through on, and it's better to take your time before you get moving and make sure you do it right. So it actually took several months of planning, and probably several years, but several months that I was aware of. I was kind of hoping to be out in January. I ended up coming out in the middle of May.
Well, now the Sunday edition is a very important part of the whole picture. Very important part of the whole picture.
From a business standpoint, it's made a big difference because other papers from outside the market used to have large penetration here because they had Sundays and we didn't. People would pick up the Times-Union or the Free Press out of Burlington. And right now, the Press Republican's in an enviable position. Because of the international border, the Gazette is essentially shut out of the market. Not so much because no one wants to read a Canadian paper, but because they're covering Canadian government, they're Canadian or Quebec in most of their political and economic coverage. The Burlington Free Press is a $17.50 ferry ride away, so a lot of what they're doing is Vermont-based. It's not really relevant. People go there to shop sometimes, but boy, you add $17 to whatever you spend, and the price differential's got to be pretty good. And then you've got the Glens Falls paper to the south of us, but they don't cover our community, they don't cover our sports, and they're not enough bigger to offer any other advantages. We cross swords with them around Ticonderoga, and we cross swords with the Watertown Times in Malone and Tupper Lake, and that's about it. Other than the two small papers, Malone and Saranac Lake, and Lake Placid, we don't have anybody our size picking on us, or certainly not someone bigger. If it weren't for the border, we would be suburban Montreal, and the Gazette would be in here whomping on us. So we're in a very lucky position compared to a comparable sized paper, say in Westchester, Orange County, that has to deal with the New York dailies.
These are the kinds of discussions that insiders have, and
That's
that newspaper readers don't very often hear about. So I think it's important to come in once in a while behind the scenes and let people know who you consider your competition to be and how big this newspaper is compared to other cities this size. I have no idea what the circulation is of the Press Republican right now. I know it's a lot different than it was the day you walked in the door.
Well, we vary
And I'll
between...
give you full credit for all of it, too.
That's right. It's my writing. We're around 22 to 25,000, depending on the season. We lose a little bit when the snowbirds leave. We pick up a little bit more when they come back, and things vary. Things go up and down, but we're just under 25,000, which is one of those numbers where they divide things in the industry. 25 or 50 is usually a divider. on various awards or various categories. So we're considered still a small paper, though there's sometimes another division at 15 or 10,000, which we're much larger than. But we would be considered a smaller, maybe mid-sized paper, depending on the context.
For people who aren't familiar, and I can't imagine anybody viewing this in the Tri-County region of northern New York who wouldn't be, but the Press Republican is a daily newspaper, publishes 7 days a week, and about how many days a year?
All but 2. We don't publish on Thanksgiving and Christmas. I believe those are the 2 days. I sometimes forget.
I sometimes forget too.
There are two days.
I'm glad somebody else is in the same boat with me.
There are 2 days a year, and of course, another thing to remember about that is if you're working in the newsroom and so forth, it means you work on those holidays. It's the day before that everybody's off.
I think about that when I pick up the paper, and I wonder how many other people do, because it's a unique medium in that respect.
Well, it's unique. Yes, everything we do is essentially the day before, and a lot of what we do is timing. When you get back to the newsroom, one of the things I tell kids when I'm touring through here is the sports goes out last. They do their work last because they've always got that hockey game or that Monday night football game or something where they got to get those results in, because our competition in this market is electronic media and now the web, although we're also on the web. But people can get stuff so quickly that what we need to do is we need to make sure we've got a relatively complete story so we can give them more detail than they're going to get through TV or radio. And we need to deliver it on time. It's no good if we close up shop at 5 o'clock and the paper wasn't on your doorstep until 6 o'clock the next day. Look how much we've missed. So we end up working, the press is run around midnight. And so what we hope is that no news breaks. All right, now I'll tell you the truth. This is the inside. Yeah. What we really don't want to have happen is for something to happen in time for Channel 5 to get it on at 11 and us not to have it on the doorstep. We have the capability of covering that situation. We would do it. But we prefer the news to end around 9 or 10 o'clock at night so that we can have our fair share at it and not give Channel 5 anything to sink their teeth into.
We don't want reporters to get hurt fighting their way back to the computer. It's a mad dash some days, though, late at night.
We've had times, well, of course, election night is always a circus.
Yeah.
Well, the other night, the Academy Awards.
Yep.
And as that thing, now I was home because I'm not in the news department anymore, so I got to be at home. But I know that they were holding a page or two for the Academy Awards, and as those speeches went on, and the production numbers and the extra presentations to people you never knew existed and couldn't care less about, and I finally gave up on the thing at 12:30. But by golly, the next morning there was Best Film, or Best Picture was right there. The picture of Gwyneth Paltrow and the whole thing. It's really amazing how quickly we can move compared to a few years ago when we were setting type through other means, when photographs had to be processed in other means. We can get stuff straight out of Serbia right now and have it on page 1 in the morning in color with a full report, and that might have taken us 4 or 5 days to get that picture back in the 40s.
It's great for people to find out these things because, not being a real insider, but having been in the media for a long time in this area, I love to look at those things, and I like to see who scoops who. And I used to think in the radio business, if I can't scoop the newspaper, I'm not doing my job. But the newspaper scoops a lot of people, and that pleases individual reporters when they get a lock on a story and nobody knows about it until it shows up on page 3. Huh?
Isn't that wonderful? Or page 1 if you're lucky.
Or
page 1 if you're lucky. And it comes down in any news gathering, as you well know, it comes down to, are you going to be the person that they call when someone's got a tip? You really do a lot of spade work. You really have to know your market. You have to know the people. You have to earn their trust, so that when they've got a problem, they say, oh, I'll call Peterson. Someone will say, I'll call Gordy. And when you're the person they call, that's when you're really making a mark in a community. And I think at a paper like this, or in a community like ours, the media is viewed almost as a public utility. We're a for-profit business. And it's wrong to concentrate on the news side to the disadvantage of the rest of the people that work here, because the newsroom's really only about maybe a fifth or less of our total employment. But at the same time, that's the face people see, and that's the face that matters. And when they want to know, why didn't you do this? Why did you do this? Why'd you make that decision? And the difference between us and the phone company or the electric company in the public mind is very small. They have a very strong sense of ownership, a very strong sense that that the newspaper belongs to them.
But you wouldn't really have it any other way, I don't think.
It's a wonderful advantage. It's a wonderful advantage. If we're not their newspaper, then we're not doing our job. We need to be essential in their lives. And a lot of what you want is you want to preserve that sense of if you haven't read the paper yet, you're not really ready for the day. And it happens. It happens. You go into business and people will be standing there around the coffee pot talking about something they read in the paper. You want that. You don't want them to always be talking about something they saw on TV. You don't want them to be talking about something they heard on the radio.
It's hard for them to hang that up on their refrigerator, though, if they see it on TV.
No, and the newspaper really is the in-depth medium of record. In other words, people will see, okay, there was, they'll see that there was a plane crash on TV. The next day, they pick up the paper, and they want to know where the plane was coming from, where it was going, why it went down, if you can get a little inset map, if you can give them some idea of what might have happened, and so forth and so on, and if you've got a list of survivors or whatever it might be, where they were from, what they were doing, you give them the fill-in details. Okay, they know what happened from the electronic media. Until they get the paper, they don't really know what happened, and that's the advantage we have. Now, the Internet's biting on that pretty hard.
It certainly is.
Oh, it's tough. The Internet is a very tough competitor, but of course, as I say, we've got our webpage up and running, www.pressrepublican.com.
I'm sure a lot of people viewing this don't know that. Even people who have computers, they haven't come across it.
We've only been up for a couple of weeks now, and it's still kind of a work in progress, but I think the Internet always is a work in progress. I have not seen a site that hasn't changed since the time I've started looking at it. You go back a few months later and they will have altered this and changed that, and it's one of the advantages of the Internet is that you can constantly readjust what you're doing, although you have to establish a certain brand, you have to establish something recognizable so that when people come to your site they know who you are. And that's the same thing that we've just had a redesign with the front page of the paper. And again, as with starting the Sunday, it took a lot of thought and a lot of planning, because when you change that, if McDonald's suddenly decided that the golden arches weren't what they wanted to put out front,
made them green.
Boy, they better come up with something. They better come up with something fast that people are going to recognize. When people are walking in and out of the convenience store, they're going to see that rack of newspapers, and they need to recognize us. They need to look and say, "Oh, that's my paper." We don't want them to say that's a paper. We want them to say that's my paper. And if they don't recognize what we call above the fold page 1 as the Press Republican, if it doesn't stand out, we're going to lose sales there. It's the same thing on the Internet. If people come to your site and they don't recognize it as a place they're familiar with and comfortable with, they may not come back. And so anytime you're working with the public, you need to give them a good, consistent face that they can identify and that they can feel comfortable with. But as I say, the Internet and the news business generally is a constant reinvention. Every day you look at the newspaper as a writer, as an editor, as a photographer, as a marketer, as an advertising person, no matter where you are in this building, you look at the paper every day and you say, "Oh, there's another way I could have done that. Next time I'm going to do this. Next time we're going to make this adjustment." So that every year when you cover the elections, you come away and you say, "Okay, we did a nice job, but gosh, we should have done this, we could have done this, we might have done this." And the next time you try that. And it's kind of nice to have your job be different every day, which it essentially is.
It's very nice to see that the hometown newspaper this size, is willing to make some pretty risky changes at times because it believes what they're doing is right.
It's interesting when you look back at the paper, and I do, because I do the look back segment
that's
that runs
fun too.
Mondays.
That's
I love
fun too.
I love look back. But you look back at the papers 100 years ago, and the difference is all of a sudden you'll be going through, and in I believe it was the beginning of 1898, the press suddenly got the ability to use much more pictures, now not photographs. They could do photographs, but mostly line drawings, just in time for the Spanish-American War. And
Nice how that worked out.
oh,
isn't it?
they were blowing the Republican out of the water in terms of their technical superiority, and it was very dramatic. They did the switch over at the beginning of the year. In fact, they missed 2 days, which I don't think they intended to. I have a feeling something went wrong. But all of a sudden, you're looking at December of '97, and you switch reels and go to January of '98, and it was very, very different. And so you go through and you find times when all of a sudden a technological advance would occur, and we would be in a position to deal with it, because of course you can't always pick up what some of the big city papers are able to do, but you move pretty fast. You try to catch up because it is a competitive business. And all of a sudden you'll have this tremendous change. I think the internet has done that, and I also think the ability is some of the stuff you'll see back in the newsroom, the technological stuff, we move a lot faster than we used to, and we move a lot faster than we did when I first came here, and I don't like to feel that old.
You know that when you get really old, as I am, the image you have of a newsroom is a lot of clackety-clack, and that charming sound, even of the teletypes, has changed so tremendously over the last 20 years. It's incredible.
I hate to say it, but I was freelancing for papers back in the typewriter days and the days of the canary yellow sheets, and
Oh, boy.
and you know, when reporters had stories that they typed, and then they went down to someone to set type, and the choices were made, and the fights between the newsroom and the back shop, and the arguments, and you know, when you're trying to put something out every 24 hours, it can get a little testy, and there are great legendary tales of the competition, or the little eruptions that would occur between the guys who were producing the paper and the guys who were writing it. Well, today it's mostly the same guys, because so much of the stuff, because of the computerization, the pages are laid out in the newsroom, and it's streamlined. It has, unfortunately, it's eliminated some positions, but it's created positions so that the net employment change isn't as much. But boy, when we tell kids you reinvent your job every 5 years, you relearn your job, it's very, very true. And one of the things I tell kids is, boy, brush up your computer skills. Keep those things sharp, because there's no job today that doesn't require them. And everybody here works on a computer at some point during the day.
Oh, absolutely. As you can see, screens all throughout the building. But as you said also, that's true of almost any business today. You better be ready. Start with it early in your career, because it's very hard when you're in your 50s and you turn on a computer for the first time. It really is.
25 years ago, or a little more now, 1973, we moved into this building. We used to be over on Clinton Street.
That's a good point.
And we switched from hot lead to offset printing. And what they did is they set up, I believe in the Witherell Hotel, they set up a couple of computers. And the back shop,
I forgot that.
the back shop guys would get off their shift at the Press Republican. They'd go over to the Witherell and they'd practice putting out dummy pages, because they had to learn. There was some very, very, very rudimentary computer stuff going on Clinton Street. But basically it was one of those rare times. It was like a stagecoach driver learning to drive a Model T. It was one of those times when you just have to make that leap. And it was a tremendous leap from the old typesetting to running a computer. But at that time, when they first moved over here, it was still typewriters for the reporters. They didn't have to make that change. Now, we just went through a change about 2 years ago, going from DOS-based computers to Windows. And that was big, but nothing like going from typewriters to computers. So you have those periods. At the same time, one of the things I tell kids is you work at a job for 6 or 7 years, and what will happen is someone will bring out a photograph of the old, you know, a six-year-old photograph, and they say, oh, look at that, look how much hair you had. Thank you.
And they always start with me.
But then you look around, and, you know, you do a little bit of, oh, remember her? I wonder what she's doing now. Oh, well, she's leaving so-and-so. But then you look at the equipment. You say, God, remember those old computers. Remember those old things. Remember those. And you look around, and none of the equipment that you were using then is still in the building. And that can happen 6, 7, 8 years. That's fast. That is fast changes, and you don't notice it when you're there. But if you find people who are resistant to change, who say, well, I'm just going to keep mine, and they don't take those opportunities to train, they're not helping themselves.
Yeah, technology is amazing, and we all have to get up to learn new things every day of our lives. But the bottom line is, if you don't publish a good newspaper...
Well, if nobody reads you, you become the tree falling in the forest.
You got that right.
Absolutely. No, you got to connect with people, and that's the other side of it, is whatever the technology, you still have to have a finger on the pulse in the sense of knowing what people want, of knowing where you fit in, of knowing what else is going on in their lives. If they're getting information from other sources, you need to know that. You need to know what the holes are. You need to know those little snippets of news that they're hearing or picking up here and there that they want to get the full story on, and you need to know how to get that full story in. So it's news judgment is a real skill, and like a lot of things, like writing a great novel, you can write a great novel if nobody wants to read it. It wasn't great after all. And for news, you can know everything in the world. If you can't connect with your community, you're going to fail.
Yeah, you got to connect. The best thing in the world, the highest compliment, is when people get their paper early enough before they have to leave for work in the morning, and they go to work and discuss what they read in the Press Republican all day long.
Feedback is, as you know, you don't get enough of it. You never get enough of it. And you run into somebody and they say, oh, something you wrote hit me, it reminded me of this, or it made me think of this, even if it made them angry. Even if they come to you and they say, well, you really should have said such and such. They thought about it. You connected with them. And I don't necessarily want them to agree with me, although it would be a fine world if everyone did. I could be king. But I want them to think. And even if they end up, I don't want them to be disappointed in what I said. But if they're angry, great. You thought.
Stimulating
we got you
people,
going.
Being a gadfly, sparking thought. Those are all very laudable things.
And I love to see in the letters to the editor, I would much rather see a letter saying, I disagreed with your editorial, I thought your coverage of such and such a story was poor. I'd rather see that than letters about things we didn't write about at all. Now, obviously, you'd love to have them say you deserve a Pulitzer for your wonderful coverage, but people don't write. They expect us to be good. So if we're good, they don't say anything. We don't get many letters saying what a good job we did. We get letters when we do wrong, and I think that's true of anybody. You know that if you're doing a good job and it's expected of you, it goes by the board. And one of the things we know is, as parents, when we're dealing with young people, but also if you're dealing with people that work for you, you got to remember to tell them when they're doing it right, and not just when they're tell them when they're doing it wrong. But it happens, and it's something you expect in the media, is that they'll bring you up short when they don't think you're doing it right.
Every newspaper, as every other radio, television station, every other part of the medium, and other media has a personality. And as you said before, we want people to recognize that paper when they see it on the newsstand, but also when they pick it up and read it. You want it to kind of feel good when you go through the paper.
You want them to be surprised at the content. You don't want them to be surprised because they weren't expecting the coverage to be the way it was, or they weren't expecting. You don't want to shock them. If they're surprised, you want it to be delight.
He's talking about that perfect world again, folks. It's very difficult because you develop the newspaper as a unit. The Press Republican develops a philosophy, and it has credos, and it has plans, and it has ideas about the way it covers things and what it covers and what it doesn't cover. The public may not always know that.
Well, we're a family here, in the sense that, like any family, we've got a variety of people in the place, and sometimes the decisions that are made by the family, by the heads of families, are not necessarily what every kid in the family would have done, or every aunt or every cousin. But you do, if it's a good functioning family, you come up with a consensus. And I think this is the kind of thing that Peter Drucker was saying back in the 70s. A business has to know who they are. You have to have an identity. What is it that we do? And if you haven't answered that question, your business is really going to fail. And so I think that for all the times that something might be an internal conflict, as with any family, you shouldn't have conflicts where people seriously disagree with the direction a business is going. And that's not just true of the paper. That would be true of a manufacturing company or a retail store or anything. It should have enough of a goal and a direction that the general course of that it's sailing is agreeable to everyone, and everyone understands what their role is, and everyone understands that they're making a contribution to something that works. And I think that in terms of satisfaction with your job, that's a large part of it.
Yeah. There's a lot more that goes on within these walls than people have any idea about, even though we've touched on a few things. But I'd like to go around and meet some people. I want to mention that Mike Peterson wasn't the self-elected lead man in this program today. Our new publisher, Zeke Fleet, who's very quickly endearing himself to the community in so many ways, was in a very important meeting and will be available for us in a few minutes today. But you know your subject well, Michael, and it's always great to talk to you about it. But there's a lot that goes on inside these walls that people have no idea. Things that happen beyond what they read in the paper.
Well, what I tell teachers when we're talking about career tours, and of course a lot of the tours I do with the schools now are based on career education, because that's very important. And you've got everything in here. Now, we don't brew our own ink, and we don't make our own paper, but we take blank paper and ink, we process it, we add value to it, and we retail the final product, which is unusual. You won't find that. There's very few places where you can find as much going on in terms of the business process as you'll find under our roof. We start with the raw product, we retail the final product, and that gives you quite a wide spectrum. And yes, a lot goes on under here.
How many people all told?
I wish you hadn't asked, because I've forgotten.
I don't have a clue.
Over 100.
Is that amazing?
It's a large operation, and of course it's pretty much a 24-hour operation. We have maybe an hour or two of kind of hang time between the time the last paper has left the building and the first complaints of "you missed me" come in. But you know, people are delivering during that period, so there's really no time at which the paper isn't in motion. And by the way, speaking of the "you missed me's," we might get 35 calls on a bad day. And that's of 22,000, 24,000 papers. That ain't bad. That ain't bad. We do a nice job. Every once in a while you'll have a case where one route will fail. Somebody's car wouldn't start, or they went in a ditch on the ice or something. And so you'll get a lot of calls that day from that route. But for the most part, what will happen then is the person will call in and someone will go out and deliver that route. So if it's early enough and they let us know in time, the paper may be a little late. But no, in terms of simply forgetting people, our success rate, or our failure rate in terms of forgetting them, is really, I think, remarkably low.
All I can say is I am delighted that my kids are all grown and none of my kids want to be paper boys and girls anymore.
It's a wonderful job. You should sign up right now. Call 56.
But always the hassle of getting my kids out of bed and getting them on the road. It seems like the paper delivery people are so much more conscientious. I don't think that was a unique problem with me 20 years ago.
We try to have the paper on your porch at 6:30 in the morning. And it is a unique situation. And what you'll find in the business generally, and also here, is that we have more motor routes than we would have had even 10 years ago, but certainly 25 years ago. And the door-to-door delivery is primarily in city, high concentration areas, and you will still have people going door-to-door, but more and more, particularly with the rural areas, we are in the three-county area, you're talking about motor routes, and there it's frequently a second job for someone. They're getting up early in the morning, they're running their route, and then they're going off to work too, which is nice because it gives them an added incentive to get those papers out on time.
You know, we could belabor this point for a long time, but suffice it to say, I live in an area where the paper person, the appropriate phrase these days, has my paper there very early because I'm not happy unless the first thing I focus my eyes on past the door to the bathroom is that paper. If I get my glasses and struggle onto a stool and have a cup of coffee, I want my eyes to focus on that front page because it's been a ritual for me for so many years.
The newspaper is part of being a successful adult. One of the things I talk about in our education program in the school is our program places a newspaper in the classroom every day of the year. Some similar programs at other papers will have a special week where they'll make a special push. But what I tell teachers and what I tell my contemporaries at other papers is that's not how you read the paper. The paper is every day. And I'll tell you something, we have papers that go into the schools that they will place in a reading program, so they end up in the study halls. And I want to tell you, if we miss there, the kids squawk. They want the paper in there. They want to read. Maybe they're only reading the sports. But I have had so many kids who say, oh yes, well I read that. And I say, where? Study hall. And I'm thrilled because I think if you're only using the paper when you need to find a job and you need to help wanted ads, if you only buy the paper when you're going to buy a car and you want to look in the ads, if you're only buying the paper because you need to rent an apartment, that's not how you use the newspaper. It shouldn't be a spot buy. It should be part of your life. And as you say, your day should be incomplete if you haven't settled in and really brought yourself up to speed with what's going on in the world and, more importantly, what's going on in your community. And that's a place where the small paper will always have an advantage, not only over the New York Times, but over the Internet. You're not going to log on and find out what happened in Schuyler Falls last night. It ain't going to happen.
No way.
Unless it's on our website.
Unless it's on the website. Well, I want our viewers to know that we've done a very fine job at killing however many minutes we were here until other people can take over this series. And I know that Jim Dinko was going to be somewhere in about 2:30, so we want to talk to Jim and some other folks before we go. He's gone.
He's gone. I was trying to.
Oh well, we've missed him. He gets as much ink as he wants. He's the boss.
We'll nail him the next time around. Where should we look first?
Well, I would say that we're looking right now at kind of a center part of the newspaper. This is where you come in. This is the door the money comes in, because our advertising and customer service are here. So we've got circulation going on here, and we've also got advertising. Our customer service department handles subscription issues. They also handle classified ads. And by the way, Gordy, there's a reason they call them classified ads, which until I got into this business, I'd never thought about it. Everything's under classifications. If you want a boat, you look under boats. If you want a dog, you look under pets. If you want a job, you look under help wanted. That's why they're called classified ads. Over in this area is where we deal with our display advertising. Display being more graphic oriented, it has more photographs of products, it uses more artwork to attract your attention, so it displays things. And we've got slightly different jobs in each. Classified advertising is primarily done by phone. Of course, people call in with their ads, but we also will call them, not the individual having the garage sale, but we would call the car dealers, the realtors, the auction houses, and make sure that we're up to speed with what they want to do this week, because they really rely on the classified section. Over in display, our salespeople are out on the street. They're out, and they need to be in the business, much more actively working with the merchants to make sure that what's happening is what the merchant needs to have happen, the client. So that's much more of a street sales position, but then we've also got people here who coordinate what happens after that, make sure the ads get scheduled properly, make sure that they get made up correctly in our art department, and make sure they get on the page where they belong, because you need to fulfill every part. You need to, first of all, make the agreement, second of all, make up the product the way the customer wants it, and second, deliver it. And that's essentially what advertising is. It is a product for the client's benefit. And so this is the same as making furniture or making a dress or flipping a burger. You got to find out what they want, give it to them, and make sure you deliver it properly in the form they, A, the form they expected, and B, the form that they truly want.
That's great. Well, now we put the salad on your plate. We're going to put the dressing on and deliver the the entree in just a few moments as we continue our tour of the Press Republican. Now we're at the inner sanctum. We're inside with new publisher Zeke Fleet. Welcome to our community.
It's nice to be here.
You know, you and I have met as we serve on a foundation together at the CVPH Medical Center. It's nice to get involved, isn't it?
Oh, it's wonderful to get involved. I've found in my 6 months here in Plattsburgh that there are a lot of wonderful, caring people that are willing to put a lot back into the community, such as yourself.
You know, and it's good to do that. People say, why do you do it? Because it was here from me when I came here. And if we don't keep that circle going by giving back a little bit, then we don't maintain that unique quality of life that we have.
That's right. That's right. And community involvement is one of my responsibilities. And the Press Republican has been here since 1811, and we hope to be here another couple hundred years. So we can't let those things take care of it themselves. We have to work at them.
We love to. Of course, I'm a nostalgia freak, and I love to look back and look in the old newspapers. And long before I ever dreamed I would ever be called upon to write an insignificant little column for this newspaper on Sundays, I used to look back through the old copies, sit at the Plattsburgh Public Library and look at the old microfilm over and over again, before the days of computers, doing that research in the old newspapers, and it's kind of fun. I've always been a newspaper fan.
Yeah, newspapers are a chronicle of the area's history, day by day, and we're proud to be part of that history. We're proud to be the ones that gather the information and actually put it together and have it available for our children and our grandchildren.
You know, a lot of our viewers and a lot of the newspaper readers might not know who Zeke Fleet is, and you know, what an incredible name. Isn't that the best name anybody ever had?
I don't know
Zeke
that.
Fleet, superhero. I can see the comics now.
I don't know about that, but
Where do you come from, and how did you get here?
well, I'm originally from Michigan, from central Michigan, and I moved here the end of last August. I was transferred here from the Press Republican sister paper in Traverse City, Michigan. And Traverse City is a city in the northwest corner of the lower peninsula of Michigan. I'm an employee of Ottaway Newspapers, which is the owner of the Press Republican, and I was transferred here after former publisher Brenda Tallman retired.
Did you come here kicking and screaming, or was
Hardly. No, I was eager to come here, and I find this area a lot like where I came from. Cold, snowy, long winters, kind of a resort area with a lot of lakes and hills, and so I'm not a big city person, and so Plattsburgh and this area is a perfect fit for me and my family.
There is a lot in this area to endear itself to people like you and me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially if you like the outdoors, if you like working with good people, if you like living in an area with the Adirondacks at your back door and close to Montreal and a lot of other good places to go and visit, this is a great spot. Got a lot of opportunity here.
Don't you love it when people say that, who visit this area? And, you know, it used to be people would say, oh, no, you're sending me to Plattsburgh.
Oh, no. No, it's a good...
Now they'll say, can I go to Plattsburgh?
Yeah, that's right. It's a great area. It's a great place to live, work, and raise a family.
That's terrific. Why does a newspaper need a publisher?
Well, the publisher's role is actually to oversee all the different departments in the entire operation, from the news and advertising, circulation, the business office. And one of my important jobs is that I'm the go-between the Press Republican and our corporate office. So I'm the one that does most of that working communication with them. I'm responsible for the company's financials, and also I work with each department head to make sure that their section of the operation is running smooth as far as staffing and production and everything else. I'm just kind of the one that tries to draw it all together.
Is 6 months long enough to get a handle on the...
Oh, no. This is a lifelong learning job, and I had a similar role. I was the general manager at a little bit larger paper in Michigan, and so this transition hasn't been hard. I haven't really had to face anything new here that I hadn't been up against in Michigan. So it's been a pretty good transition for me.
Well, you know, we talked a little bit with Michael about how this particular newspaper is set up, how it compares in size with others, what its chief competitors are, and how it, you know, in a very general way, how early it gets up in the morning and how it does its job. But I'd like to have you explain that a little bit more about some of the various departments, and then we can go and look at some of them.
Yeah. Well, the newspaper is made up of about 7 different departments, and all of us work together each day to get the paper out. And we each have our own roles, and unfortunately, people and departments at the Press Republican are sometimes the worst communicators. And I hate to say that about ourselves, but sometimes the advertising department isn't aware of what's going on in the newsroom, or in the press room, or in the mail room, or in the business office. And so one of my jobs is to draw it all together. We operate here basically 24 hours a day. We go to press each morning at 1 a.m. while most folks are sleeping, and we aim to get the papers delivered by 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning to their homes and to newsstands.
It sounds simple when it comes in one sentence like that.
Yeah, it
But
is.
some days.
No, the news department, of course, is responsible for gathering and writing the news and assembling it electronically into pages each day. Of course, the advertising department is responsible for selling 3 types of advertising: display advertising to the merchants up and down Main Street, and all the merchants in all the communities, Plattsburgh, Malone, and Tupper Lake, and everywhere else in the 3-county area that we cover. The distribution department takes care of delivery. They, in the early morning hours, take the papers to our carriers here in Plattsburgh and also out to the far reaches of the 3-county area that we cover. And a lot of that work is done at night. Our business department's responsible for our accounts payable, accounts receivable, the money we collect from news or from advertising and circulation, and also our human resources and payroll departments. Classified, that's the People's Marketplace, where we have our in-column help wanted, real estate, automotive, and those type of ads. And then we sell preprints, taken care of in the mailroom, the Ames, the Hills, the circulars that are in the paper from Grand Union and the other stores, at least weekly. And they're responsible for putting those in and making sure the papers are bundled and assembled and get out the door. So all these departments work together. They're independent, but they work together to get the job done. And we're one of the few types of industries where we manufacture a new product every day. We come in the morning and start from scratch with news and advertising and the whole package, and assemble it, print it, and get it out the door, and turn around and do it again the next day.
It's one of those jobs that is very seldom mundane.
No, never. No 2 days are the same. The 2 things that you have to have for a job like mine: you've got to like people, and you can't let the little things bother you. You have to have thick skin a lot of
You gotta
times,
have perspective.
and keep a lot of balls in the air, and not get shaken up, not get shook up by the little things that you run across. You know.
It's so hard to profile the average reader, the average viewer. It's so hard because people get that newspaper for a variety of different reasons.
That's right.
Some are wonderful and encouraging, and they bolster your spirits, and some are a little bit disappointing. But as long as the numbers are there, and as long as the people get that feedback that we were talking about with Michael on a regular basis, good, bad, or indifferent, as long as we know people are looking at that newspaper and getting the best, and you try to put out a good product, then you can be pretty satisfied when you lay your head down.
Yeah, we do that. To our readers, the newspaper represents something unique each day. And after a period of time, our readers take ownership of the paper. They have ownership of the Press Republican. And when we make changes, and if they don't agree with the changes, it's evident that we've done something personal to them, and we've taken something away, or we've given them something they didn't want or didn't expect. And sometimes it's hard to measure what kind of reaction our readers are going to have to changes. But sometimes in a business, we have to make changes. We have to try new things, and we have to try to grow. Replace columns with different columns, and there's a lot of things.
Change the front page a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
And I remember at one time you talk about ownership. twice that word has been used since we've been inside the doors today, and it's very important to do that, especially in an area this size. Because I remember some years ago, having spent a long time in the radio business in this town, when we tried to eliminate the obituaries on the news. Well, that lasted one day. And the hue and cry was so tremendous that they were back in the news the next day.
Right.
These are not questions you talk about in a metropolis, but in Clinton County and Plattsburgh and the North Country, you do.
It's important. It's important that we have a lot of people who tell us they buy the newspaper for the obituaries, they buy it for the comics, they buy it for the ads, they buy it for the editorial page. Everyone has their reason. But I know, as you say, that the obituaries are very high in the readership area.
But
Very
I even though I'm left-handed, I don't start on the back page. And I'm one of those people who scans all of it. I only have a limited amount of time to see the newspaper the first time through, but don't throw it away for a couple of days because I like to go back. But I try to scan, I think I scan every line in the newspaper before I go to work in the morning, just so I can get a general idea. I'm used to scanning and getting things, digesting things. I eat way too fast, and I probably read way too fast sometimes, but I can go back and enjoy things later. And I suppose there are other people like me who like to look at everything.
Oh, there are. Actually, when we make maybe even a minor mistake, most people wouldn't even notice. Our phone will ring. Or we'll get a letter pointing it out to us. And we know that people are watching us with a magnifying glass. They see everything that we put in the paper. Sometimes not everything every day, but people really pay attention because it's their newspaper. And a lot of people have more time than others. Myself, I spend about a half hour to 45 minutes every day, cover to cover, reading the paper, including all the ads, because I have a special interest in it. But like you...
Oh, yes, you do.
Like you, I'll read the paper, I'll give it a once-over, put it down, maybe a half hour later, pick it up and read it again, sometimes 3 or 4 times in the day, and until I get through the whole thing.
Well, it's an extension of who you are, this newspaper.
Oh, that's
even
right.
though you've only been here 6 months, you're in there.
Oh, yeah, you have to be.
You're in there. So what are we going to look at? Can you show us around a little bit?
I'd like to show you some of the different departments and further explain what each department does and how it fits into the picture as far as getting the paper out each day.
We're on our way. Where are we now?
We're in the
Fearless leader?
We're in the Press Republican's display advertising department. And this department is responsible for about 65% of our total advertising revenue. And the jobs of the people in this department are to sell the advertising to the merchants. And each of our advertising salespeople have anywhere from 45 to 80 accounts they're responsible for. And we're divided up into geographic territories. Also in this department, they're responsible for doing the typesetting, the layouts, and the scheduling for the ads that we sell. Basically, we work about 2.5 days out front of deadline. So today is Wednesday. We're working on Friday's paper, finishing up Friday's paper.
And there's competition for every one of those dollars.
Lots of competition. A lot of people say that the Press Republican's the only show in town as far as print, but it's not true. We have competition from weeklies, direct mail, from television, from radio, cable, a lot of different competition after those advertising dollars.
Some that are seen and unseen.
That's
and they
right.
keep creeping in more of them.
That's right.
That big piece of pie, the slices, somehow get changed every day.
Fortunately, we've been able to hang on to our market share and hopefully bringing our merchants the response they need to justify their advertising with us.
Well, there's a bottom line to everything, and if you can't bring the dollars in...
Right, that's the point. At the Press Republican, like most daily newspapers, about 70% of our total revenue comes from advertising sales, and then the other 30% comes from our circulation, or the money readers pay to buy the paper.
So roughly how many people overall do we have here on staff at the Press Republican?
Our total number of people on staff is just over 140. That counts all the employee drivers and the part-time people all together. On a day-to-day, there are probably about 110 working at a time. But remember, they're coming in at 7 o'clock in the morning and going home at 7 o'clock in the morning. So we've got shifts changing all the time doing different jobs. We're not all here at once.
This is kind of an amazing facility, and as I said to Michael before, just because you don't hear the clackety-clack of typewriters in the newsroom anymore,
It's all computers.
doesn't mean there isn't activity.
Yeah.
And sometimes little tiny puffs of smoke coming out from certain work areas when you know they're...
Yeah, it's the technology here has really changed, especially in the last 10 years or so. We don't have typewriters. Everything is electronic. We do all of our ad and story composition right on the computer screen. It all comes together in a process called pagination, where we compose the stories, we compose the ads.
Sounds like a lead into a
Yeah.
song.
No.
Pagination.
And we're able to output all these what we call camera ready or negative ready stories right to a machine that we call an image setter, and make a plate and put it right on the press. So it's a lot more streamlined than it used to be.
Oh yeah. Things do have a habit of changing.
Yep.
Yes, you can go by.
Yeah.
You're forever captured for
Yeah.
immortality. All right, what's next, Zeke?
Well, I want to show you one of the terminals, the computer terminals where we actually compose or make the advertising, if we want to come this way.
All right, we'll
Okay.
do that too. All right, we're here.
Okay, we're in the advertising composition area at the Press Republican right now, and we're looking over the shoulder of Melanie Ruff, who is working on our IBM equipment using software called Quark, Q-U-A-R-K.
I should have known there'd be a quark in there
Yeah.
somewhere.
It's specially designed for us to use to compose, electronically compose all the advertising. And if you can see on her computer screen, she's written headlines, she has copy, she's actually imported artwork for this for the automobiles that you see on there. And after she has this completed, she will be able to output color separations for this ad. She'll be able to output a proof to send over to the advertisers so they can see it before it goes into paper. And when it's all done, she can export it to a printer machine that we call an image setter. And from there, we'll make a plate and put it on the press. So it's all electronic.
You know, that's absolutely amazing to me, and I know a little bit about these things, so I'm sure to our viewers it must be there's a miracle going on.
Well, I don't know. It's keeping up with the technology is what it is. And before, maybe 5 years ago, all this work was done with X-Acto knives and layout paper. And
No, that's what I mean.
Yeah, it was all done manually. So what we have done is we are able to do a better job with typefaces, a better job with art, reproduction, and you no longer see crooked copy like you used to. Those type of mistakes that we made when we did it manually.
This is the difference between computer animation and the way the old Disney guys used to do it.
That's
you know?
right. Yep. It's a way of the future, and we wonder sometimes now what production will be like and what this business will be like 10 years from now. The way technology is changing.
Sometimes it's even hard to dream those kinds of dreams,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it's difficult. Yeah, that's for sure.
How many people work in this area now?
Oh, I think we have about 6 people altogether in the support staff, which we call this area for our advertising salespeople. And they do things besides just make the ads on the screen, but they work with our commercial printing jobs. They work on special promotions and different artwork we need. They work on stuff for our website, Press Republican Online. They're able to compose elements for that. Lots of different things for us.
I want to mention that several times before we're finished, because that's something relatively new here at the Press Republican, and that's going to be growing as time goes on. People cannot expect to get on the website and see every page and every word yet,
Right.
but they can get a sampling, and they can log on from Cucamonga and see what
That's
we're
right.
doing up here.
We have we just began our website January 1st this year, and we have a lot of response from people who live in faraway places that have some affiliation with the Plattsburgh area, and they tell us how happy they are to get the news from home electronically. So it works out fine.
The news from, and that's the news from Lake Wobegon.
Yeah, that's
I
it.
love it. All right, where to
Okay.
next?
Well, we can go back now to our news area and talk a little bit about how the news electronic production and news gathering fits in with what we do with the advertising department.
We'll be delighted. Zeke, Calvin always tries to think like our viewers might be thinking as they're watching, and he asked a question as we were leaving the other area. how do you know what fits on a page? Two people sell large ads, and you talked about setting up a dummy page.
Yeah, a couple days before the actual publication day, we do what we call a page dummy. In other words, we decide which ads are going to go on which page, and we do a little mini version of the newspaper page and give a copy of that to the newsroom, and they know that the space that isn't used for advertising can be used for news. And Jack and the others then will design their work around the advertising on those pages.
That's great. All right, who do we have here?
This is Jack Downs.
Great. Jack, how are you, buddy?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
You know, we're talking about the Sunday paper and when it started. What was that, like 10 or 12 years
I
ago?
don't actually even recall the date.
In September of '87.
Really? Wow.
Isn't that amazing? You were here then, though, right?
Yes, it was. Yeah, I've been here about 15 years.
You were involved in that, weren't you?
Sure, I was the second Sunday editor, and I was here for the beginning of the Sunday paper. So it was quite an exciting time.
Talk about growing pains, boy. There was a lot of discussion about it. People on the streets were looking for. I never forget the first one that came out, although I didn't realize it was that long ago.
And it's hard to imagine us now without one. If we take it for granted, it's a very important part of our work every week, though.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, news is a very important part of the paper, and you know that's what I did for a living for a long time in another medium entirely. What's it like for you on a daily basis?
Well, things have changed a lot since, as you mentioned, the start of the Sunday paper. Everything has become digital. Everything has become electronic. All of our copy is handled electronically, all our photographs, all of our other images. Zeke was mentioning the electronic dummies, the system that we use to determine the space that we use for news. I take those dummies, those mini pages, and I shuffle them out, decide who's going to do what page, what's going to go on what page, how the overall structure of the paper is going to look for that day, as far as where the wire news is, where the lifestyles pages are, and so on. And then what we start to do is we budget how many stories we have, about how long they're going to be, about what pages they will go on, what kind of images we have, and we either by hand on paper or electronically start to sketch out what each of those pages will look like. And the end product, we're literally on an electronic dummy, on a page on a computer screen, dragging and pulling those images and those pieces of text around, make things fit, decide if things are going to jump or go somewhere else, and all the editing, all the picture editing and the word editing is all happening on a computer screen.
People have to be pretty facile at all these different tasks because the clock chases you every cotton-picking day.
Yes, it does. Yeah, we have to do it fresh every day. Every day is a new day, and every day is a whole new newspaper. Although we do have some long-range projects that take longer to do, it's a daily deadline, daily struggle, or daily excitement to get the paper out.
You can't labor over a headline for 3 hours or have committee meetings. Somebody got to make a decision on those.
Yeah, it's especially late at night, as we're nearing our press time. It becomes exciting, sometimes intense, sometimes busy, sometimes frustrating, especially on days when there's breaking news. There will be a struggle to try to get as much in as we can, as late as we can. The electronic tools that we have now give us a lot more flexibility to make changes in things late and to rework large parts of the paper very quickly, very late at night. But as you say, it takes very skilled people. The skills are very different than they used to be. The responsibility rests much more in the newsroom now, and all the production demands are in the newsroom now.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier with Mike Peterson, Zeke. That's very interesting. You know, if we got a huge story that's breaking at 12:35 in the morning,
Yeah,
or what's even worse, at 5 after 1.
it gets rather hectic, but we do our best to within the time frame to get the most current news in the paper. Understand that we have an obligation to go to press close to 1 o'clock. Otherwise, we wouldn't get the papers delivered in time in the morning.
You talk about the Academy Awards the other night, getting the best picture in the next day. Talk about that controversial heavyweight prize fight, which
Or we
went
talked about an
very late,
election
or an
night.
election night,
Yeah.
which is even more
Yeah,
critical.
we had to make special provisions for nights like that. But you're absolutely right that the best newspaper isn't any good if it doesn't get to the person. And if we miss the deadline, if things go badly wrong or whatever, then people don't get their paper. And the best newspaper isn't any good then.
Just picture 140 jugglers in here at 12:30 at night. And when's the last time you said, "I can't do this anymore"?
No. I would never say that. No.
But at times, I understand the frustration. Having worked under the gun by that clock that had legs and chased me everywhere in the radio business all those years, I know what it's like. It's sometimes not easy, but it requires, I think, special kinds of personalities. Newspaper people are sometimes the most colorful and interesting people on the face of the earth.
Well, yeah.
Sometimes that makes it easy, and sometimes it makes it hard, but it all makes for a good newspaper.
Yeah, that's right. We do have a variety of personalities, and most of our people, though, are able to roll with the punches and to keep a cool head, make good, sound decisions, even if it's 1 o'clock in the morning, as Jack says, and do what we have to do to get the paper out. That's part of being a good newspaper person. We have a lot of those.
And it helps to have people in the departments who are independent thinkers.
That's right.
Who can make those decisions along the way, so we don't have to call those committee meetings.
That's right. And the people also, besides being independent thinkers, they're veterans.
That helps a lot, too.
This isn't anything new for any of us. What we're doing today, most of us have been doing this for years, and we're able to make the decisions under the gun and to get a instinct after a while of what the best thing to do that's in the best interest of the paper and our readers.
Sometimes it has to be magic, doesn't it, Jack?
Sometimes it feels magical when it all works out.
But there is no job more satisfying than to wake up in the morning and pick up that newspaper and say, "Yep,
Yeah.
did it."
And know you have to go do it all over again the next day.
Did it again, and never mind.
Right.
Put on a different tie and start the whole process
Do it all over again. That's right.
But it's a magical and wonderful process, and I hope we've demystified a little bit of it so far today. Jack, how long have you been in the business?
I've been here 15 years, a little more than that.
You started doing what when you walked in the door?
I started as an intern out of college, as a reporter, and I was a reporter doing most of the beats in the newsroom, from political reporting and science reporting, environmental reporting, to town boards and school budgets and everything right on through.
I'm smiling, but that's how you pay your dues.
Yeah. So I did a lot of different reporting jobs here, then gradually moved up into editing and did different production and systems work now, a lot of computer work now.
Well, let's talk just a little bit while we're standing here as questions flood my mind. Who makes decisions what to cover on a given day in the news?
Well, we have a daily page one meeting, a meeting usually around 4 o'clock, which all the editors get together and throw out everything they've got, explain what they think their big stories are, and we have a discussion about what's going to go on page 1, what's going to go on page 3, page 5, what's going to be in lifestyles, what's going to be in business. And that meeting is the culmination of discussions that happened earlier with reporters and other meetings earlier in the day. So we make those preliminary and big decisions at that point, but as news develops later in the evening, final decisions are usually made 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night, depending on breaking news, with the flexibility to change them as we have to, 11, 11:30, 12. So it's a series of decisions that lead to the final product. And on quiet, smooth days, it all proceeds quite methodically. On busy, hectic days, those decisions have to flip-flop back and forth as news breaks.
You know, and when you have egos involved and people think we need about 200 more words here and another half a column, and somebody says, no, let's not. So that's there are always those decisions to make at the last minute. And what fits here, what we need, what we can follow up on tomorrow, and what we can get in today. So it's what I want our viewers to realize before we leave here today is that it's a busy process. It's a very busy process.
It keeps you busy all day long, and you, as an editor, As reporters too, you often feel like the day flies by, and you just look up and you realize it's 9 o'clock already. That page has got to be done. It's 11 o'clock already. Mostly everything should be out, so the day seems to fly by.
But the show must go on, right, Zeke?
That's right, and no 2 days are the same.
Don't you love it? Jack, thanks so much for talking with us for a minute.
Thank you, Gordy.
Best of luck. What's next?
Well, we can step into Bob Grady's office and say hi to him, our managing editor.
I'd love to do that.
Okay.
On our way in this office, I really wanted our viewers to see that there were little sparks around, like a halo around the door when we walked in, for a very good reason. This is the office of the managing editor, right?
That's right, Mr. Bob Grady. Bob's been with us for quite a while, and we can talk to Bob and kind of get an overview on the reporter's role in the news process, and kind of the flow of the schedules and assignments for stories and that sort of thing.
Talk about a guy that's been everywhere and done everything. I used to think he had pretty good sense until he took me out to lunch one day, he and Jim Dinko, and said, "Would you like to try?" I'll never forget that day saying, how would I ever write a column for the newspaper? You talked me into it.
Gee, that isn't my recollection, Gordy. I remember you
free
calling
meal,
me
a
up
free
saying,
meal.
"Can I do it?"
But guess what? 97 of those columns later, we're still doing it and still having a good time.
Well, sometimes we make good decisions and sometimes we don't.
Yeah, you got lucky that time around.
We did.
Robert, you and I have been friends for a long time because we've been in those very deep trenches together for a long time. How did you ever get started in this business?
Well, I always wanted to get into this business. I figured there were two essential ingredients to being a good reporter, or to being a reporter at all. One is you have to have an interest in the language and be fascinated with what words can do and what you can do with words. And the other is to be nosy. You really have to be an essentially nosy person. You want to be the one who goes and tells everybody at home the story first. Wait till you hear what happened to Johnny. Or if that's your inclination, chances are, if you have any facility with the language, you would probably be a good reporter.
If you're not curious, you don't have a chance.
You've got to be.
You want to know.
You've got to insist on knowing. You've got to resent the fact that somebody wants to keep it from you.
I love it.
And you really have to want to know. You can't spend all your life interviewing people, as you may be able to attest, if you don't really have a regard for the people and what you're doing. It's not. You have to be able to think on your feet. You have to be able to react very quickly. You have to become an instant expert, and it's not difficult. That is, it's not easy. But if you are pretty good at it, it's a pretty rewarding way to make a living. Every day is different, and you've done this for a couple of years yourself. You know the rewards that can come from doing this job well.
You have to understand people. You have to make a instant judgment about a situation. You have to be so careful because your emotions are going crazy, and sometimes your personal bias enters into decisions you have to make, and
Well,
when you sit in this chair, it's a very tough chair to sit in.
You're right, and essentially you can't have personal biases. You have to be able to assess what somebody's saying to you. You got to know human nature. You got to get a feel for human nature, and you have to really become an instant expert on a wide variety of topics. Somebody will come in and tell you about landfills. Then I was just on the phone with Senator Schumer. These things come up at a moment's notice, and you have to really be able to think on your feet.
You know, it's very true, and you have to be a quick study.
Yeah, you do. And as you say, sizing up something, sizing up a situation. Is it, are you being lied to, or are you being, led down the primrose path?
As we have been at times.
Well, sure, we all have.
But you have to see the essence of the story right from the beginning. You have to pick an angle.
You do, and one of the things about a newspaper our size, we've been very fortunate in the last 10, 12, 15 years to be able to retain people. It's difficult to get somebody in from Cleveland, Ohio, or Butte, Montana, and expect them to know how to spell Churubusco. Expect them
Try
to
it
have-
on the radio sometime.
Yeah, right. Well, see, you guys don't need to spell. That's one of the... See, when we got you, we knew that we had a liability with the spelling. But yeah, and an institutional memory, too. You know, I mean, you did that for Wiry for years and years and years, decades. You and Chet. Here, if we allow much of a turnover to take place, we don't have any institutional memory outside of the editors. It really is important to be able to retain people so they can know what happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Who was Roland St. Pierre? Who was Art Lefebvre? To mention just a couple of guys who have...
But you know,
Come and
you
going out of
picked
it.
out two icons right
Well,
off
yeah.
the top. I mean, you talk about Roland St. Pierre, and I can smell the cigar right now.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
just brought the memory back.
Absolutely. Well, that's what. How about Al Cezanne or
Boy.
Demetrius Cezanne out at the
Oh,
Crate Center?
Oh my.
You need some of this. If you don't have any perspective on what's going on around here when it happens, you don't know how important it is.
I think you've made some very important statements there, and that includes all the other media, but especially in a newspaper, because what you do has a different kind of importance than it does in any other media.
Well, it does because it lasts, it endures. People come in all the time and they want to see a clip from 15, 20 years ago. Well, if we ran a correction the next day, the people who look up that clip 15 or 20 years ago, they're not going to see the correction the next day. Really, we are, whether we like it or not, and we do, we highly regard this role as being the really recorder of history in any community. That's what a newspaper does. And it's difficult because we can't go on the air 5 minutes later and say, oh, sorry, wait a second, that wasn't correct.
That's right.
We have one edition a day, and it had better be right. We're not claiming we can spell every word right. We can spell every word right, but we don't. But when you're dealing in hundreds of thousands of words a day, if you get almost all of them right, now I'm not mitigating the importance of having everything perfect, but realistically we have to understand that it's not going to be perfect every day, much to our chagrin, but we think we have a responsibility not only to get the facts right, but to maintain high standards of communication. We have to be the guardians of the language. We've got to sort of really set the moral tone for the community as well. On radio, for example, you're hearing more and more of the offensive language creep in on certain...
You notice that. huh?
Yeah, and now it's taken for granted. It's not, people don't even raise their eyebrows anymore. Well, we think that there needs to be a guardian, and probably in most communities it's going to be the newspaper.
And you do it very well. Let's talk about what happens in this news department in the course of a day. Who starts it off in the morning and who goes to bed with it at night?
Well, to say we're a 24-hour operation would be only a slight exaggeration. The whole thing really gets going for real at about, between 8 and 9 in the morning. Jim Dinko, the editor, comes in first, and he sort of probably reconnoiters the situation to see if anything has to be done right off the bat. Lois Claremont, the news editor, comes in at about 9, and that's when the news gathering day starts in earnest. The reporters begin to come in as they need to come in. We used to We used to have a strict 2 to 10:30 day, but it occurred to us after a number of years and a number of generations that the news doesn't happen from 2 to 10:30. That we really were sort of flowing against the tide by trying to really gather news at night. We have some meetings, of course, but you can't call people at home, for example, and get all the information you need. They have their opinions at night, but they don't have their facts. So reporters start to come in anywhere from 10 o'clock on. If they have a night meeting, we don't make them work 16, 17 hours a day. They'll adjust their schedules to reflect that. They may come in, if they've got a late meeting, they may come in at 1 or 2 in the afternoon. We keep one reporter, and they rotate to come in at night so that we always have somebody here in case something happens. Our police reporter stays till usually 11 or so because we have to do the late police check after the last shift change at the state police. And so we pretty much have things covered from probably 9 o'clock in the morning till midnight, after which the news doesn't do us any good anyway because we can't get it in the paper for the next day.
You do your best bright and early the next day to get it, and it's amazing the process to me, as I'm sure it is to our viewers and your readers, how all those words that you were talking about before end up on the page in some kind of order that is educational and interesting and entertaining.
Let me tell you something, Gordy. I don't think that there's a more confounding industry in America, in the world, than the newspaper industry, and for this reason. There's no assembly line here. We come up with a brand new product every day. It's utterly new. The advertisements are new. The classified ads are new. The news is obviously new. It better be new. And we get all those pictures. It starts with an idea. Somebody has an idea for a story. So the story gets assigned. Then the story gets researched, and then it gets written. It's like a bunch of little term papers, and some of them aren't so little. Every day, they're all organized. You talk to Jack Downs, you know how that happens. It all gets organized. The film gets developed, or if it's digital film, it gets put onto the page, however that happens. The cut lines are written. The stories are read and reread again, and headlines are written for them. And all of this is presented in a package that is pretty convenient for the readers, I think. And at midnight or 1 o'clock, it's shipped off to the press, which is another remarkable piece of machinery. The papers get loaded into the truck. They get delivered all over the North Country, a 3,000 square mile area, all by the time people get up in the morning, or for the most part, and with any luck. And then it starts all over again 2 or 3 hours later. It's amazing. Now, I'm not trying to say that we're more impressive than medical advancements or the space exploration or anything like that, but on a day-to-day basis, to see what happens here, this is not something where you stop the assembly line here and then pick it up when it's convenient. We're in business 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, although we publish 363, but we're still gathering news during that time. We're doing all the things that have to be done every day to produce a newspaper, keeping up with the electronic changes and the unbelievable advances in technology. That's another thing we've been up against. When I started here, we typed our stories with typewriters and ripped them out.
Yes, I do remember.
Yeah. And to see this thing happen every day with as few mistakes as we do, and I hesitate to say that because I know some people are going to be watching this who say, "Are you kidding? You're lucky if you spell your name right." Well, one time a reader called up and we had noted that a sign went up, a new road sign, street sign went up, Olivetti Place, and misspelled Olivetti. There were 2 L's in Olivetti. And we had pointed that out in the newspaper. And somebody called up and said, "Who are you kidding? You can't spell anything either." And my response to that was, that day, I think 3 street signs went up. If we had only 3 words to spell each day, I guarantee you we'd get them right.
I love it. Ah, you got me where you want me. Yeah, that's a wonderful explanation. And, you know, the professionals are very often amazed at the end product, even though they've invested their soul and their spirit, their energy and their time in that product. The feeling when that paper hits the desk or hits your front porch in the morning is, wow, how did we do it again? And I want our viewers to get that same feeling, like this is an amazing accomplishment every day, every day, every day.
I think it is. I would like more than anything in the world for it to be perfect, absolutely flawless, so that anybody could look through that thing and word after word and picture after picture and not be able to find one thing to find fault with. But when we're selling 20-some thousand copies a day, and we have 50-some thousand readers because each paper is read by 2.3 people or whatever it is. I don't know what the 0.3 people are getting out of it, but certainly not everybody's going to be delighted every day. And we have to make some tough decisions here on what to put in the paper and what not to put in the paper. And those decisions, of course, some people are happy with them, some people aren't. So we know we have automatic opportunities to aggravate our customers, and that's certainly a situation that rubs us the wrong way. We wish we could make everybody happy. If we were going to try to make everybody happy, we'd have a lousy newspaper. It's as simple as that.
But it's tough to make some of those editorial decisions because, as I said earlier, you have a press Republican philosophy, and then you have a philosophy, and the other people have philosophies. And I've seen Lois in different gatherings of senior citizens and school groups and teachers and politicians, and explaining very eloquently how things happen and why, and how some things make it and some things don't make it.
We've got to, we have to draw lines, and the lines aren't always popular. Some years ago, we used to run as many misdemeanors, for example, in our police log as we could. That was a difficult thing to do because there are far too many to get them all, and we're covering 3 counties. There are 14 towns in Clinton County alone, 5 villages, a city. Essex County has 18 towns. We're covering part of Franklin County as well. It's just too big an area. So we decided we're going to cover only felonies, which we can do. We can. They all get filtered through a funnel that we can get a grasp on. We can't handle all these misdemeanors. So, and this happened because one night I was sitting out there on the desk, and a kid came in, a college kid came in, and he said, I just got arrested. Can I keep that out of the paper? And I said, no, you absolutely can't keep it out of the paper. If my mother committed a misdemeanor or a crime, I couldn't keep it out of the paper. Nobody can keep it out of the paper. But where did it happen? And he said, well, I was sent out on a fraternity prank for fraternity pledge to shoplift $1.50 worth of candy. And I said, where'd you do it? He said, I did it at Price Chopper. I said, well, you hit the jackpot, because that's outside the city. We couldn't get all those misdemeanors. If you had done it in the Grand Union, which at the time was in the city, you'd be in the paper whether you liked it or not. So I got to thinking, gee, what an unfair thing that is. So we sat around, the editors talked about it, and we decided, okay, let's forget the misdemeanors. And that's why we do only felonies, just because we think it's the fair thing to do. It's not always a popular thing to do, but we try to be as fair as we can. And it used to be, as a matter of fact, that those kinds of decisions were made by 1 or 2 people, the editor, the managing editor, the publisher. Now, every day, decisions of significance are made by a whole, the publisher gets involved, probably 5, 6, 7, 8 editors. Every day we decide what's going to go on page 1, what's going to go on 3, what's going to go on 5. Should we run this story at all? Have we asked all the questions? It's not at all a fly-by-the-seat-of-your-pants operation. We really do a lot of soul-searching, and the decisions are sometimes very, 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 very difficult to make. But that's what we have to do.
The amazing part of it is they almost always go home friends.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
We referred to this organization as a family.
It really is, and as I say, we've had good retention. So all of our editors have been here quite a long time. I'd say 10 to 30 years, probably, for the most part. As I look out there, I can't think of any exceptions. And most of the reporters have been here for quite a while. So we know our way around the community, and we remember the decision we made 10 years ago and how it would affect or apply to this decision. We're not always right, and we'll never always be right. We try hard, and we've been around the block a couple of times. I guess that's the best thing I can say.
I love it. We try hard, and we've been around the block a few times. We haven't even talked about sports, and I know what your personal love for sports is.
Yep. And I think that I can honestly say, although this guy is one of my best friends and has been for as long as I've been here, I think I can say in all honesty and bias aside that we have as good, talented, and experienced a sports editor in Bob Getz as any newspaper has anywhere. And his staff of 4 or 5 guys is a pretty talented bunch of fellas. Read Steve Willette's Sunday columns sometimes. He's a very clever writer. And they too know their way around the North Country sports, and I think it's reflected there. Sports is almost an empire unto itself. Bob Getz it's like a microcosm of the news department. He runs his department, and it's just something that we almost never have to worry about.
It's amazing how it comes out.
Yeah.
Because there's so much to do, and new sports being invented, and schools getting new sports, and
that's a huge factor, Gordy. As we've expanded to other areas, that has given us new headaches. Not only covering the new teams, but what about the leagues that those teams are in? We also we think that our stock and trade, of course, is local news, local sports. But one of the things that we're proudest of, and one of the things that we believe helps sell the Press Republican, is our ability to have late sports. You can find out maybe what happened in what happened in the Kansas City game the night before, maybe the Colorado game, probably not the Los Angeles game. That's a little too much to ask, but you can't go anyplace else for that, we think, unless you go to ESPN or the radio. But if you want to pick up a newspaper, you're better off picking up the Press Republican than USA Today or the Free Press or anything else you get in our market, because we're going to have the latest sports.
And when the paper comes out in the morning, don't screw up the lottery numbers.
Oh, jeez. You know, that's been one of the...
I couldn't help it.
Oh, jeez, that's happened. That has happened, as you probably know.
And it happened on the radio, and it happens on television.
That's awful. That is such a disastrous mistake to make, because if you...
Aren't you glad I brought it up?
If you have mistakenly led somebody to believe that he is a recent millionaire, and he finds out upon calling to cash in his ticket that he isn't, we owe him a great big apology. We had a person call up once who, we got the number wrong from the Associated Press. That happens too. I mean, it doesn't have to be our mistake. It could be an AP mistake. It could be a lottery office mistake. But for whatever reason, we ran the wrong number, and the person thought he had won, I don't know, several $100s, and thought it was incumbent on us to make good on it, and me particularly.
A whole different phase of the ball game.
Yeah, not just the Press Republican, but Bob Grady. You know, that was what she thought. Well, I had to disappoint her on that, but mistakes like that are unforgivable and irreconcilable.
But you know, it's not a perfect world, and to know that you have a team of true professionals here who are trying to make it as perfect as possible, and at the same time as entertaining and interesting and educational, I think that is a tremendous credit. And it also makes you feel good at the end of the day to know you did your best and you put your heart in it. What else could anybody ask?
That is absolutely right. That is how I feel about it at the end of the day. And I do know that we have some really outstanding talent here. We've got some very entertaining writers and some outstanding photographers. I don't want to start mentioning names because I'm going to leave some out. But for a paper our size, almost as long as I've been here, we've stacked up well. We go to conferences of our Ottaway newspaper group or the American Press Institute or whatever, and we get to compare ourselves with papers all over the state and all over the country. And really,
Guess what?
we're pretty good.
Yeah.
We're pretty good. I'm not going to tell you we're the best paper of our size in the country. In fact, I could tell you some that we aspire to be like. But year in, year out, and generation of reporter in and generation out, I think we have had more than our share of talent around here. We have some. We have very accurate and responsible and dedicated reporters who don't walk out the door and close the door on the reporting day. They're always, so it's always in their mind, which is the way it should be. Some writers who can entertain you and amuse you as well as
Make you cry and inform you.
Absolutely right. And our pictures are very professionally composed and sometimes they're very inspiring.
You know, it's truly amazing. And all of this, from a guy who could probably sing the Joe DiMaggio song right now, maybe he and Getz could do a duet.
Little duet? Sure.
And if anybody believes that the spirit of Marilyn Monroe is not alive in this room,
well, Marilyn's spirit is alive. It's I wish I could point to more palpable evidence, but the spirit's here.
well, palpable evidence is sometimes hard to come by. Right. Robert, thank you so much for these few moments and for everything you do here.
Okay, Gordy, thank you.
Are you proud of this? Okay, we're back near the locker, Zeke.
There we are, and
What's going on here?
We're back in one of the most important areas of the paper because there isn't anything that we do in the news side or the advertising side that is worth anything unless the paper gets out the door and delivered. And this man here is Mr. Jim Frenia, and he's our delivery services manager. And Jim's going to take a minute and explain the process that he goes through 7 days a week in getting the Press Republican out the door and into the homes and coin boxes for our carriers. So,
Well, a big formula from the beginning to the end. And if you can get the best stories and the best pictures, but if you don't get it on the doorsteps and stoops, Jim.
Then we're all in trouble.
Yeah. So how does it happen?
Well, how it happens quite simply is this. Once the paper has been produced, physically printed, and inserted if we have inserts, and goes through the machinery, once it passes the wall down into the garage, then it becomes my world, my product. And through the use of employee drivers, which drive our Press Republican vans, through the use of contractors, those great guys and gals who use their own vehicles and make deliveries to our carriers and our single copy locations and our coin-operated boxes, we try to shoot for a 2-hour window each morning. Namely, we like to get out somewhere around 3 o'clock in the morning, as we have a pretty diverse area to cover, in the neighborhood of 3,000 square miles. We service pretty much everything from as far north and west as Malone to as far south and west as Tupper Lake and the Tri-Lakes area, and we're also over into the village of Ticonderoga and all points in between. And we accomplish these deliveries through a variety of methods, two of which I've already mentioned: single copies, which is store locations, vending machines. We also offer people in rural areas where it's not practical to keep a carrier or practical to expect to keep a carrier. We offer motor delivery. Those will be the blue Press Republican tubes with the gold lettering on the outside, which are serviced by our contract drivers. And most importantly, we have a pretty divergent force, almost 275 strong, of youth and adult carrier who pick their bundles up either off their porch, the bottom of their driveway, or at a depot location, and come cheerfully to your door and deposit the paper either in a white plastic receptacle or between the doors.
You know, that it's an amazing way for kids to get started as entrepreneurs, isn't it? And it has been for centuries.
Absolutely. I can't think of a better way, or a few other ways, that would be most beneficial for a youngster growing up here in our North Country to acquire the qualities of workmanship, stick-to-itiveness, and the ability to get the job done than delivering a newspaper, regardless of whether it's for us or anybody else in the region. They have to rise early in the morning, usually between 5 and 5:30 a.m., and we ask that they complete their deliveries by quarter of 7 on a daily basis, 7:30 on Sunday. And they're also responsible, in addition to deliveries, collecting on their routes. We have pretty much a 50-50 mix in terms of customers who are paid in advance here at the newspaper and those that require door-to-door collection.
Is it 50-50? I'm glad you said that. I wondered what the...
Yes, that percentage is the approximate. And in addition to collecting the money, that's one thing. The young guys and gals also have to develop customer service skills, because there is that errant person who doesn't associate paying their bill in a timely fashion, as Gordy, your children remember. They have to use some tact and some skill to convince those folks to pay on time and pay properly.
I had to use tact and skill to get my kids up on time to get out there.
No, I was your son's DM, and they were never late. They were never late.
Oh boy.
So they learn money handling skills, and that, of course, is going to benefit them through their teenage and adult life. And I can't think of a more wonderful way to gain that kind of skill.
Just briefly, tell me the process again about how those bundles of newspapers end up being picked up by those individual carriers in the neighborhoods. Are they dropped off in central places, or what happens?
We as a newspaper, the Press Republican, has pretty much gotten away from using depot locations, primarily out of concern for the safety and welfare of our carriers, whether they're teenagers or adults. And I would dare say 95 to 98% of our deliveries are right to the bottom of the driveway or to the porches of the homes of our carriers. Yes.
Wow.
Yes, and the benefits to that are many. It gives the youngster or an adult the opportunity to verify their draw, the number of papers in the bundle. And if we've made a mistake and a miscount, then they're right there where our telephone is handy. They can call the mailroom, and the shortage can be dispatched to their home while they're out delivering.
Yeah, and it's interesting now, in this day and age, you do have adult carriers, don't you?
Well, ironically, the mix here at the Press Republican continues to evolve, and I would dare say as recently as last month, of the 275 carriers that we have at the newspaper, it's now a 50-50 mix, half adult, half teenager.
Isn't that amazing? And any senior citizens?
We do have some folks, and I would never use the word elderly, but we do have some older adults who make deliveries, and what they're looking for certainly is not the income, although it's there, but what they want is the exercise in the morning, the ability to walk over and do something productive at the same time. So yeah, it's
I have to throw in a personal anecdote here, because I knew a gentleman who was intimately related to my family in Brooklyn, who was 86 years old, the oldest newspaper carrier in New York City, who made enough on a very large daily route to take a nice little vacation to Puerto Rico every year. And he lived well up into his 90s, probably because of that cotton-picking paper route. And the only time I ever saw the man cry was when he went out to get his papers in the morning one day, and they were gone. Somebody had stolen them.
Well, this is one of the few industries that offers such a personalized form of service. There are no more eggmen, milkmen, or women. But there are newspaper people.
Too bad, too, you know.
Yeah. So one way or another, through all kinds of weather, we'll get it to you one way or the other.
Did you write that down? One way or another, and all kinds of, yeah, well, we got our own credos here, too. James, thanks so much for how many years now?
I've been here 19 years.
Wow, just a kid. Thanks again, Jim.
Thank you, Gordy.
Thanks, Jim.
It's kind of amazing, isn't it, Zeke, to see from one end of the operation to the other?
It is amazing, and unfortunately, after doing this every day for so many years myself, I start taking it for granted. And I think this exercise today helps refresh me as far as the ingredients that go into getting the paper out. I do take it for granted.
Yeah, we got a little exercise going from place to place. You know, I want to talk about something while we're standing here, and a couple of things. Like I said, Calvin's always got those extra questions that our viewers might be asking. This, every now and again, of course, every day you hope to be proud of your product, but every now and again you make a decision, whether it's an editorial decision or a business decision, that you're really happy with. And this newspaper knew that it was going to be right to send a reporter to Nicaragua and to chronicle those events. And I must say, from my personal point of view and how we've dealt with it and interviewed the kids and so on, this was the right thing to do at the right time.
Yeah, we received a lot of good, kind words from our readers. Not just the families and the kids themselves who went on the trip, but our readers really appreciated that personal touch that Saul Ferrer, our reporter who went with him, was able to get back. As you could tell from reading Saul's report from Nicaragua, he writes with passion and compassion. Saul was the perfect person from the Press Republican to make this trip, and we decided that this is real grassroots community journalism when we're able to have a group of kids on a mission such as this for Hurricane Mitch, for us to supply a reporter to make the trip along with them and send back through electronic means a daily report. It's like getting a letter or postcard or whatever from Nicaragua to our family.
That was a clever touch, too, you know.
Yeah, that worked out fine, and we're most happy. We're very pleased that Saul was able to make the trip and that he was allowed to make the trip, and we're most pleased with the reception of our readers from what they told us, how they liked it.
And I think most of your readers and our viewers do not know what a blessing digital cameras are in a case like that.
That's great. Saul's pictures turned out well, and he was able to transmit the digital photos along with his report itself through the computer. Yeah, so he took a laptop with him and a modem and just sent it back over the phone line.
When you consider how reporters covered significant events in our history, like the Second World War, and how they had to get those reports back home, and how these reports were relayed back to the Press Republican and on the tables the next day, kind of amazing.
Very amazing. It's technology at its best. That's what I think.
All right. Is there anything we haven't seen?
Well, I'd like to show you one of the final stages of production here at our downtown office, and that's the press and mailroom area.
We'd love to see it. Zeke, I want to cover a couple of things before we go any farther by way of our general explanation. People hear Ottaway, an Ottaway newspaper. What is the connection and what is Ottaway?
Well, Ottaway is the community newspaper subsidiary of Dow Jones. And Ottaway has been a parent of the Press Republican since 1972. Matter of fact, the Press Republican was one of the first papers in the Ottaway group. Now today, there are 19 community papers in the Ottaway group, still owned by Dow Jones. 19. And in the state of New York, of course, besides Plattsburgh, there's Middletown and Oneonta. And they're the ones in New York. Our headquarters is in Campbell Hall, New York, which is just outside of Middletown, about an hour and a half north of New York City.
So now, are you a kind of a daily liaison with Ottaway? Do you have contact with them often? Or?
Through the mail, through the email, and on the phone. Yeah, usually every day in one way or another. I have contact with Ottaway, but it's in a way where we talk about human resources, policies, and issues. Of course, financial, different reports that we supply, and different resources that we get from Ottaway. As a group of papers, we have what we call an MIS. Our Management Information Service, a central computer portion or a segment of the company, and we rely on those services too. So that gives us reason to call them and talk to them quite a bit too.
All right. Next subject: editorials. We missed Jim Dinko because he managed to slide out around the backside of our camera because I talked too long with Mike Peterson in the beginning. He's the editor. The managing editor we just spent quite a few minutes talking with, Robert. Every day there is an editorial in the newspaper and they're unsigned. Can you tell me who writes them and why are they unsigned?
Well, the editorials you see in the paper represent a consensus of our editorial board. And the editorial board is made up of myself and Bob Grady, Jim Dinko, and Lois Claremont. We meet each week and we come to the table with a variety of topics. And for the most part, we try to stick with North Country type issues, things that will be relevant to our readers, things that they care about. We don't really get into talking about things in politics in Washington or Bosnia or some of these things that are quite removed from the North Country, but we talk about things that are relevant. We come to a consensus in those meetings on Monday on what position the newspaper should take. Not one person, although one of us writes most of the editorials, we do share the responsibility of writing the editorials, and all of us review the editorials before they're published to make sure that they're what we agreed upon and that they're well written and hopefully error-free.
And response is genuinely swift.
It's very swift, and like a lot of the things we do, just because we decide on Monday at our editorial board meeting what we're going to do, that isn't chiseled in stone. If something newsworthy is going on in the community that strongly merits an editorial on our behalf, then we change our plans and we interject an editorial, hopefully within 24 hours sometimes with something going on. So we want to be flexible on these things.
You know, it dawns on me as we speak here, there are a couple more categories in the newspaper that we haven't even touched on, and that is cartoons and comics.
Cartoons and comics, these are all syndicated. And they're all, we get them from different companies like Universal Syndicate, and they send them to us electronically, and we're able to load them into our computer system and output them electronically, digitally. On Sunday, there's a company down in Georgia, in Atlanta, Georgia, called Western Color Print that does all of our color comic printing, and those come to us shipped on pallets. I think they arrive on Wednesday or Thursday each week. And then we process them and have those in our Sunday paper.
And we're lucky enough to have a pretty darn good North Country cartoonist who brings the cartoons right close to home every now and again. That's kind of neat.
Oh yeah, we try to rely on local resources the best way we can. You know, whenever there's a chance, because those cartoons are relevant. They're funny. They're about things. They make fun of us sometimes. They make fun of the community, and they highlight things that we may have overlooked. But yeah, we try to work locally when we can.
And on Sundays, the newspaper is kind of heavy, not as heavy as some of the Sunday newspapers, metropolitan areas, but inserts is something we haven't talked too much about.
Right, and I want to talk about those after we talk about the press a little bit, but on Sunday we carry anywhere from 12 to 16 inserts or supplements in the Press Republican, and most of those are advertising pieces, except for the Comics and Parade magazine. And it's a good way. It's a way of high response for our readers, our advertisers, to get their message into the home. But that's a big part of our Sunday paper.
That's great. Now let's take a look at the presses. Okay. All right?
Sure.
Well, they talk about the business end of a cow, Zeke. We're at the business end of this place, aren't we?
That's right. We're in the heart of the Press Republican right now, and we're in our press room. This is an offset press. And it was installed soon after we opened our plant in 1972. Our printing facility used to be up on Clinton Street. And what we have here is a 6-unit Goss Urbanite press. Goss is a national company that makes printing press. And at the time it was installed, it was a state-of-the-art piece of equipment. And it still does a reasonably good job for us, although nowadays there are faster and more technical, more electronic type offset presses. But for us in this market, we're very fortunate to have such a piece of equipment here at the Press Republican.
People see those big truckloads and train loads of newsprint. Has been the subject themselves of news stories down through the years when they're hard to get or hard to transport, or when when a truck tips over on the Adirondack Northway.
That's right. Newsprint expense is the second highest expense, and second to payroll, that we have here at the Press Republican. We get most of our newsprint from 4 different mills, and it comes to us, as you said, on the trucks. We unload it. In the back part of the Press Republican, we have a newsprint storage area where we keep enough newsprint to publish the Press Republican for about 30 days. Should there be a fire or a strike at the mill, we can still keep in business here. Down to the this end of the press, we have the newsprint on the reels. We usually stop 1 or 2 times during our nightly press run to change the reels. In other words, put new newsprint on it after we use a roll up, exhaust a roll. And so we're continually doing that. The press is able to run, we usually run the press right around 20,000 copies an hour if we're having a collect run. Usually runs pretty good. Most of the nights we make it through without having what we call a web break. In other words, tearing the paper and having to start from scratch and re-web the paper into the press.
Never any panic in this room at all.
No, it gets pretty hairy sometimes. We have 5 people, 5 pressmen who operate this printing press, and they not only operate the day-to-day as far as getting the press ready, but they also do the cleanup and maintenance themselves too. So they've got a big responsibility. The entire press run takes about 2.5 hours to print the Press Republican.
Each one of those rolls weighs how much?
Well, it's according to if it's a quarter roll, or a half roll, or a full roll. So it kind of varies. It's a little bit less than a ton if it's a full roll.
More than the 3 of us would want to tackle before we had a very good meal.
Oh,
what have you got in your hand there?
Now, this is a full-page negative. Now, I mentioned when we were in the advertising area that we're paginated, and after we compose the advertising on the computer terminals, after we write the stories on the computer terminals, it all comes together anywhere from 10:30 to 1 o'clock in the morning, and we have a piece of machine, kind of like a printer, except it doesn't output to paper, it outputs to negative. And this, what I have in my hand, is a newspaper negative. It's kind of like the film you get when you take your snapshots to the store and you get back your prints and you get back your negative. This is the same thing. We recycle these for their silver content, but this is the same thing that we use to print the paper. After we have the negatives for the pages, each of the Press Republican pages has its own page, one if it's just black, multiple ones if it's color. We make printing plates from these negatives. We have a machine that casts the image from this negative onto a piece of photosensitive aluminum, and I have an example of that.
All right, let's move over this way. I'll follow you down.
Okay. The image that is on this printing plate isn't the same as the negative on my hand. But what we do, basically, is cast the image in the clear areas of this negative onto this photosensitive printing plate. These are smooth. There's no letterpress quality to them. They're just smooth. And after we make the negatives, we make the plates. We take the plates and we put them on the printing press on the plate cylinders. And I don't know if you can see any of the printing plates on the press right now, but probably on a different angle you could. But each of these press units has plates on there that we print from. Basically, when we're talking of an offset press, what happens is that the image from this is offset by using a combination of ink and water onto a cylinder, and in turn that is offset to the web or the paper as it goes through the press. So ultimately the image from the negative goes to the plate, goes to the impression cylinder, and it goes to the paper. And then it comes out this piece of machinery right here, which is called a folder. It automatically forms the paper, it folds it and cuts it, and comes out a conveyor belt and heads into the mail room.
It sounds so simple, but what happens when something breaks down? Is there any backup?
Well, no, we don't have a backup printing press, although we have a contingency plan at another newspaper. If in case we had a power outage or something, we had a disaster here at the Press Republican, we have another newspaper where we have an agreement with that they would print our pages and ship them over to us that same night. just in case, but that's never happened to my knowledge.
And you better hope it
No.
never does. Although we can't finish this program without mentioning the ice storm. You weren't here then.
No, I came after that.
But this newspaper did some rather amazing things during that time period.
Yep, they did. We managed to get a paper out every day, although delivery was limited, but and the number of pages was limited. But we knew that there was a need in the market to get a report about the ice storm. Who was doing what, how progress was as far as doing the repairs and getting things back to normal. And so we published a paper every day. We had people, a lot of our managers, and people doing jobs they didn't usually do. And it paid to be well-trained in different areas and cross-trained. But they came in and we ran the press and we got the papers out in an abbreviated way, but we got the papers out each day.
And the Ice Storm publication has sold thousands.
Yeah.
And still selling.
We compiled a book of stories and photos that we took at the ice storm, and many of those photos and stories were in the Press Republican, and we've sold close to 10,000 copies of that book. It far exceeded expectations.
Oh, I know it did. Second printing, here we come.
Yeah.
All right, where are we going to go next?
Okay, now from here I want to show you what happens to the papers after they come off the press. They're coming into a place we call the mail room.
All right, let's do it. All right, we're in the mail room. We're looking at a hole in the wall, but that's where the papers come out.
That's the port coming out of the press room on the conveyor where the papers come off the press and into the mail room. It's somewhat of a misnomer. We don't really process an awful lot of mail here. Usually around 500 pieces a day are mailed out of here, but it's an old newspaper word from the days when a lot more newspapers were mailed than they are today. We still call the processing area the mail room, as most newspapers do. Basically, what we do here are take the papers off the press. We put inserts or circulars in the paper if we have any that day. We count the papers out in bundles. We strap the papers along with instructions for delivery and send them out the door for our carriers to either take it to them, or they can come and get them for home delivery. But that's what goes on here. This room is out in operation from about 1 o'clock in the morning when the press starts until about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning when they finish that day's mailroom press run.
So I imagine it's a busy place for a while.
Oh, it is. It's really hopping in here, and we usually have around 6 to 15 people, depending on the volume of inserts, working in here each night. You have to be a night owl if you like to work in the mailroom, because the hours are crazy. The work is fast. This machine that you're looking at right now is called a stitcher trimmer. For publications like our weekly TV guide or TV spotlight, this machine is able to take the publication, fold it, stitch it by putting staples in the side, and trim it. And when you get them to your home, it's a nice, convenient, about a 7.5 by 10-inch piece, but it's actually the size of a full newspaper page when it comes off press.
Is it really? And you got a sample of that right in your hand here so that Calvin can see it.
This is a copy of our TV magazine. This isn't our TV magazine, but when it comes off the press, it's this size. And this machine is able to fold it, stitch it, and trim it to make it this size. It's a Miller Martini.
It's pretty neat, huh?
Yep, it is very neat.
Along with other inserts, you have one under your color inserts.
Yep. This is a sample of an insert that we have going into the Press Republican this week, along with our TV guide will be out on Saturday. And now I want to show you the automated equipment we have that puts one insert, hopefully, into each Press Republican as they pass along the assembly line.
All right, let's do that. We can actually follow along as we talk here.
Okay. This machine we're going to look at right now is called a GMA SLS 1000,
Oh,
which is a mouthful.
I knew he'd throw numbers at us.
Oh yeah, it's a state-of-the-art computer operated piece of equipment, and if you could look down the line right here, excuse me, you see that we have 6 what we call hoppers, and maybe we could walk over a little bit closer here. This is a hopper, and it takes one person to operate a hopper. What they'll have is a pile of inserts on a skid, and they're able to take the inserts, they'll put them on a jogging table to make sure that they're nice and square, and they'll put them into the inserting hopper like this. Copies of the Press Republican, after they came out of the press room, will go under this conveyor underneath each of these hoppers, and this machine, when it's running, is able to drop one insert into each paper as it goes through. So at the end of the line, which is down at this end, when the papers get there, all the inserts, all the papers will have one insert of each in. That's how it's supposed to work.
When you get all through, the phone rings and said, "Oh no, that was for next week."
No, that rarely happens. But it works pretty well. It's a good piece of machinery, and it goes a lot faster and it's a lot more efficient than doing it the old way, which was having a person just standing there manually putting the inserts in. So
You know, it's absolutely incredible, because I've been inside this building in the front many, many times and never been back here and never had any idea. So I'm the first in line to get an education today.
yeah, that's right. Now, what you see on these on the shelves here are inserts that will go in this weekend or even the following week, and we receive these on prepaid pallets, sometimes weeks ahead of insertion dates, and we store them here until it's the day that we're supposed to send them out. So it works pretty good. It's a slick system.
You know, 3,000 square miles struck me as a rather impressive number this morning, as all of a sudden I get mail from my silly little column from Tupper Lake.
Yeah, we go far and wide, down to Ticonderoga and Tupper Lake and Malone and all over. So that's one of the reasons we need to get an early start by going to press at 1, so we can get the paper to the homes by 6, 7 o'clock or so.
So indeed, we try to cover the regional issues from 3 counties here in the northern part of the country, and all that national news. You have connections with wire services.
That's right. We get most of our news from Associated Press, and we are a member of that newswire service. They send us stories over the wire each day, and maybe when you came in, you noticed there's a satellite dish on the roof.
Oh, yeah.
That's where we get our photos and our stories from Associated Press, and also Ottaway newspaper, the service of our parent company out of Albany.
Well, I don't know. We wondered if we would have enough material to fill 2 hours. We've done that and splashed over into the second 2 hours. I think we've covered the subject very, very well. Zeke Fleet, welcome to our North Country community. I'm sorry we didn't do it officially with our little hometown cable camera before this, but we gave you a chance to get your feet a little damp anyway.
Well, I really appreciate you guys coming down, and it's been nice to talk to you, and I'm proud to be able to show off what we do here. I'm real proud of the people and our paper.
And well, you should be, and that's the way it is at the Press Republican in Plattsburgh. And who